at the 4th edition of the Forum on European Culture, in which we talk about Europe's culture. Should we talk about the culture of democracy, or should we talk about the culture of colonialism and imperialism? Well, in this upcoming 1.5 hour, we're going to do the second. I'm really glad that we can have this conversation in an international way. So we have thinkers and speakers with roots in France, Senegal, the Caribbean, the Netherlands, Portugal, and maybe I'm missing something. And my name is Rogaya Sek. I'm a program editor here at the Balie, and I'm also going to host this program. At the end of the program, there's also room for questions from the audience. So I'm a little bit out of breath because of my pregnancy. I want to let's start by welcoming our guests. Today, Mam Fatou Nyang, who's sitting next to me. She's a scholar, a writer, and also a filmmaker and an artist. And she's associate professor of French and Black geographies, and the founder and director of Center for Black European Studies and the Atlantic. Next to her, Wouter Veraert, professor of legal philosophy and head of the Department of Legal Theory and Legal History at the Vrije Universiteit here in Amsterdam. Next to him, there's Kehinde Andrews, UK's first professor and also maybe Europe's only professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University, and writer of books as The New Age of Empire and Back to Black. And Sophia Lovegrove, independent researcher and heritage professional, who's born in the UK, brought up in Portugal and based in the Netherlands, and who's currently working at Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands for the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. Welcome, a warm welcome to everyone. Yay! So I think we have a lot to discuss. So I want to start with a quick round for all these representatives that we have here at the table and the country they're kind of come from. What is the colonial past of, and not like a whole lecture. We can give a whole lecture of it, but just quick to refresh everybody's mind. Kinde, let's start with you. The colonial past of
the UK.
Of the UK.
Briefly, okay.
Briefly.
So, Britain had the largest empire that's ever existed in human history. At one point, it covered 24% of the world and 24% of the world's population. That included large parts of Africa, the Caribbean, Asia. Really, it was an empire so large that the sun never set. I don't know. I mean, I can give more, but I mean, Britain is, of all the empires, I guess, should be proud. It was the biggest, I guess. but somehow.
And when did it kind of start, and when did it end?
So the British Empire it's a bit later than Portugal kind of is the first that goes in, particularly into to the west. Britain really starts getting in the late 16th century, but not really until 17th century, 18th century. By the 18th century, it's the main slave trading nation, has lots of Caribbean colonies. Then also in the 18th century goes into India, takes the Indian subcontinent. So really for a period, if you say 16th century up until late 20th century. I mean, even now Britain does still have some colonies. Still has the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth is the former British Empire rebranded, if you like, where countries aren't necessarily formally part of the empire, but they are part of the Commonwealth. So my home country is Jamaica. That is a Commonwealth country. Still has King Charles is the head of state of Jamaica, and 14 other countries as well. On the UK. So British Empire, very large, still exists, and explains also why Britain is one of the more diverse countries in Europe now.
Diverse?
Diverse in terms of where I live in Birmingham. Birmingham is now majority minority, more black and brown people than there are white people, but almost all of us come from a former British colony.
Yeah. Right? So, okay, thanks. Sophia?
I think that's a nice, well, you already mentioned Portugal. Portugal was indeed the first European empire, also the last one, if you count Macau, which was the sovereignty of Macau was transferred to China in 1999. Before that, I mean, most of the empire was dissolved in 1975, following the Carnation Revolution. But it started in 1415, is sort of seen as the first, the starting date when Portugal conquered Ceuta in Morocco, currently Morocco. And, well, I think most people know it had included Brazil, which is a huge part of South America, several colonies in Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, São Tomé and Príncipe, and Cape Verde, and several parts in Asia, of course, as well, mostly trading posts.
Okay, let's go to the Netherlands.
Yes, well, perhaps not as big as the UK, the Dutch Empire, but still impressive. I think that it's also interesting, I think, to note that many colonies changed color during history. For example, Sri Lanka was first taken by the Portuguese, then by the Dutch, then by the UK. And this history also is important and telling. For example, nowadays the Dutch colonies are remembered as the East and the West, leaving out somehow those parts of the Dutch Empire, like Sri Lanka, nowadays Sri Lanka, or the Cape Colony, what's currently South Africa. The West is still part of the Netherlands.
Which countries?
The Dutch Antilles, or the Caribbean part of the Netherlands. Of course, Suriname is now an independent country, of course, but the debates right now, when we talk about slavery, we talk mainly about the West, but also about the East. It's very much debated. Not as much on the topic of slavery, but the war of decolonization, of course, and also in relation to cultural objects that have been taken in colonial times. And now there's much debate about whether they should be returned or not. But, well, I think most people in the audience will know a lot about colonial history, but, well, it is not as impressive as the British one, but still it is a lot, I would say. Yeah.
And let's end with France. I think they also, when I see that map, they came kind of to say late to the party.
Okay. So before talking about giving the snapshot for France, I just want to say that some of the things that I'm going to talk about, you know, to present the colonial situation in France are things that I learned in the US. So I left France as a master's student, having graduated in history and architecture from one of the top schools in France. And it's in the US that I learned that Haiti was a French colony. It's in the US that we don't learn about colonization. I'm 41, and I'm a generation that did not learn about colonization. We learn about the civilizing mission, but this really followed a trait, and this is something that I'm going to discuss here, this construction of Frenchness based on, you know, the recommendation of historians like Ernest Renan, who in this very famous speech that you can find on Google that is called Qu'est-ce que la nation, what is a nation, said as a historian that the most dangerous thing for the nation is history and the development of history, and the glue of the nation should be forgetting, actually more than forgetting, amnesia. And it happens that I'm a 7th generation French, and the thing that explains why I'm French is the part that has been amputated. So France is a late starter, and all of these things I learned outside of France. In my mid-20s, France is a late starter, like the UK, end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century with Richelieu, and this, we need to follow what's happening with Portugal, etc., and establish ourselves as a European power, and we'll go on to have the second biggest colonial empire from the coast of Oceania to India, a huge part of Africa. All the way to the 1960s, we had the huge wave of independence, especially in Africa in the 1960s, and there's huge debates right now if some of these African continents are really independent. We might discuss this issue with neocolonialism. But as far as this colonial history, and is it part of the history of France? It's not. And I think it's, one of the major points that I'm going to discuss. How can we say sorry about something that we don't consider as one, part of our history, two, as something that is broken?
Yeah, so a lot of topics that we have to dive into, the culture, identity, and there were a lot of things you said.
Memory.
But start with the apologies, or this is the program called How You're Obsessed, sorry. So let's take a look.
Je désire réaffirmer mes plus profonds regrets pour ces blessures du passé.
We must also acknowledge the wrongs which have shaped our past. Many of those wrongs belong to an earlier age with different and, in some ways, lesser values.
Et dire à chacune et chacun, on doit réconcilier ces mémoires. Ce sont les mémoires d'une même expérience. Bon. Des choses atroces, des barbaries, des crimes contre l'humanité ont été commis.
Wir bezeichnen heute diese Ereignisse jetzt auch offiziell als das, was sie gewesen sind, ein Völkermord. Wir bekennen uns damit auch zu unserer historischen Verantwortung.
Eeuwenlang is onder Nederlands staatsgezag de menselijke waardigheid met voeten getreden op de meest afschuwelijke manier. Daarvoor bied ik namens de Nederlandse regering excuses aan.
We too must find ways, new ways to acknowledge our past.
Today, I apologize.
Não é apenas pedirmos desculpa.
I cannot describe the depths of my personal sorrow at the suffering of so many.
Não, é o assumir a responsabilidade para o futuro daquilo que de bom e de mau fizemos no passado.
Awe mi tapidi disculpa. Tide, mi vani, taki, pardon.
Regret and apologies.
So a lot of different words are used. Are there legal differences between these words? So apologies, regrets, acknowledgement.
Well, you are looking to me. I understand because I'm from the law faculty. Well, yes, it is. First of all, it is of course a performance. So there's a lot of rhetorics going on. There are lots of moral terms used. Also Christian words, or
What kind of Christian words?
like sorrow and remorse and words like that, which are sort of religious register is opened there. But well, let's keep it a bit more legal. Then you have the regret and the apology. So it's somehow, by some lawyers, they say, well, a statement of regret is not taking political or legal responsibility. Is you show empathy and it stays like that. You are not yet acknowledging your own responsibility. You do not take responsibility for this past by showing, by stating your regret. So what people want, some people want or asking are formal apologies, meaning that this apology is an acknowledgement or recognition of the wrong of the past. And there is always a danger that people are saying, well, I acknowledge the wrongness of the past, but only in a moral sense, not in a legal sense. And it was very nice, or the clips, but for me, very nice quote, which was not in the fragment, is by Tony Blair, I think 2004, and then he said, from my own memory, it is hard to believe that what is now a crime against humanity was legal at the time. So I like this because it is ambivalent. He says, well, nowadays we say it is a crime against humanity, and it's very hard to believe it was legal at the time, implying it stays like that. It's still the legal reality of the past that we acknowledge, but we do not acknowledge that what was apparently legal at the time was in fact a crime.
And you also found a kind of legal disclaimer, I think you called it
yes.
in the text of Mark Rutte.
Yes, so this Mark Rutte is, now it is rhetorically, it is an almost perfect performance. He got very much credits for this, many credits for this speech. But if you look at it more closely, you see that he is saying, we, living in the here and now, are acknowledging slavery as a crime against humanity. So staying away from the further more serious statement that it was also a crime at the time. Absolutely. A crime against humanity at the time. So according to the standards of the time. And then you are somehow starting to repair this history and saying what was legal at the time, we not acknowledge it anymore as legal at the time. We now understand that it was in fact a legal injustice, a legal crime. And we take responsibility for that legal crime. And we take a responsibility that is not only a moral responsibility, but which is a political, legal responsibility.
Do you think they do it in person? That's the reason he's framing it like that?
Yes, I think that is what I suppose. I'm not sure, but I think that this speech is well crafted, and all kind of advisors have looked at it and say, well, stay away of this legal recognition, call it a crime against humanity, but only in the present, and not a crime against humanity in the past. Still recognize this legality of this past injustice, which I think is, in terms of an apology, is still ambivalent in a certain way.
And Mom, what does those words mean to you?
Well, so this reminds me of a conference that we had. I think you were there at MIT. What does justice looks like? And at the end, there were a question that were asked to some of attendees who had stayed, and the question was, what is the most exciting development on the field of reparation right now in your country? And I was the last one to speak for France, and people had very intricate, complex things going on with environmental justice, the use, of law, how all these things should intersect with race, etc. And at the time, it was the spring of 2020, the most important issue, for example, in France on the front of race was, is race a thing?
Was still a discussion.
Right? And I'm like, oh my God. And the reason I'm thinking that is that he's going into so many details, and I'm like, wow, I don't know if you know this, but my president appeared once to say this. We have to reconcile these memories. Which memory? Which memory? I spoke of Renan, of how our history, so most of the French kids graduate from public system, and even if you go to a private system, in order for the diploma in terminale, which is the last grade of high school, to be recognized, a certain number of your course had to be follow the street. So history is crafted by the Ministère de l'Éducation nationale, the Ministry of National Education, right? All programs. And history follows it has to give pride in us. And when we think about colonization, for example, for the longest time, it was the thing is not to teach it. And in the 90s, I'm part of this generation where we had this debate, okay, we can teach it. And we remember Jacques Chirac's famous sentence, but then if we have to teach it, we'll just teach the good side of it. The vaccines, the roads, and historians one up in arm. You can't tell us what to teach. So this is where we are right now. From Renan to l'École des Annales, history should not teach what makes French people, not feel proud about themselves. So there is no memory. I don't know if I can show my image now to explain.
Yeah, but maybe we can also do that later. Maybe we should start the image somewhere at 21
just to finish with Macron, he says two things.
But wait, before we show the image, I think you opened a debate about it. And I think it made you kind of the most hated person in France.
And I think this will kind of frame what I'm saying. This is what Macron says. We have to reconcile these memories. Atrocious things were committed. What things? What are the things? What memory are we talking about? What you're seeing here is the monument commemorating the abolition of slavery at the French Parliament. So we are in a country where there's zero monument to talk about colonization. We have 3 monuments for the abolition and the gift of liberty. and the gift of freedom. So the rhetoric on colonization and slavery is a rhetoric of independence or freedom being
and
given.
the monument is still there?
So it's been there for 30 years, and just to talk, and really this gives you a context of how far we are in the non-conversation, because in order to say sorry, and this is why Macron can't say he's sorry, he said we have to reconcile these memories, atrocious things were committed, but there is no base for us in France because there is no memory. So this fresco commemorates the abolition of slavery in the French Parliament. I discovered it in 2019 when I went to screen my film at the French Parliament and send a letter to the President of Parliament with a colleague, Julien Ciodo, saying that this is racist. And it started a sequence of 3 weeks that were very hard on me and my family. I had to move. I received more than 12,000 tweets, hate tweets. It was very hard. And French officials, you can Google this, like the most respected journals, even center-right, center-left, extreme left journals, and this is really in defense of the Republic, saying that I was crazy. I teach in the US. I'm importing race and racism because, I don't know if you know it, but legally, race does not exist in France. The word was removed from our constitution. Race does not exist, so racism does not exist. To call this racism, I'm bringing race. I was told that black people have big lips, so this is not racist, it's just natural. I was told that the artist gives rice to kids in Ethiopia. He cannot be racist. I was told that the wall of the National Assembly are the wall of the Republic, and they are a rampart, kryptonite against racism. Something that is racist cannot enter. I was called that this is satire. I was called that this is irony. And to me, all these things together brings us the state of where we are in this debate. We do not see this as... I was told that I was ingrate because I should be happy that my history, not French history, that my history was represented in the wall of the National Assembly. So to me, the question is, we have the Taubira law, but how do we get even people to start thinking that this is not my history, it's not a history of black people, a parallel, but this is a history of France from the end of the 16th century to now. This is where we are in France.
Okay, thank you. And also thank you for starting the debate over there.
And can we remove this?
Please remove it.
Isn't it inaccurate as well?
And it's very inaccurate. I'll show you. I don't know.
What is inaccurate about it?
Sure, slavery was not abolished in France.
No, so this is the other. No, so this is the other thing. Yes,
for the first time.
So this is the other thing. Like one of the most respected radio hosts said that I was crazy because when we started learning about abolition, we learned 1848, which is, Schulcher and this very important image of Schulcher with the French flag and the slaves who are completely, taken by emotion and throwing themselves at the Republic, giving them freedom. This is 1848. But it's in the US at 29 years old that I learned for the first time that France abolished slavery in 1794. The economy tanked and Napoleon reinstated it. I never learned it in France. And the fun thing is that radio hosts say, of course she has to be teaching in the US. She's too dumb to teach in France. She doesn't even know that slavery was abolished in 1848. So even him didn't know that we abolished slavery. And to teach us that would mean that we would have to teach young French people that we gave liberty to people and took it 8 years, which we can't teach, right? So
yeah. So, Kehinde, why do you think the UK didn't apologize yet?
Oh, it's money. It's about reparations. It is a very legal... The reason you hear only one person actually say apologize directly is because once you apologize, you start to open yourself up to, well, you're responsible, right? And so you'll hear regret.
And one person, you mean...
The doctor.
I thought from Germany.
I didn't... Did he say sorry properly?
He said it was a genocide and...
Namibia.
Yeah.
Yeah, but guess what? They're now being sued. So when you apologize for things directly, you end up then being sued for those things. So Germany is a good example where there's a suit. They make payment. There's going to be a large payment, eventually. So if Tony Blair is a good example when he comes and he says, "Oh, sorry, it's in the past. I feel bad," but to actually say I'm sorry, I apologize, is in some legal sense to take some responsibility, and then people can then say, well, actually, we can sue you for this. So yeah, it's fine to say you have sorrow, regret, but to actually apologize is a different.
And Sophia, I think it's also really interesting in Portugal because maybe the debate just began.
Yeah, no, I mean, the debate has existed for some time, but in very small circles, not in the public, in the media, let's say. Since 2017, it has become very, very big in the public sphere because there were two important controversies, let's say, or two things that happened at the same time, which was that the mayor of Lisbon suggested that there should be created a museum of the discoveries in Lisbon in 2017. At the same time, in the same year, there was an association called JAS, Association of Afro-Descendants, who managed to get a project approved in the municipality to create the first memorial to the victims of slavery in Portugal. Portugal has, at this moment, still no monument to remember slavery and the victims of slavery. So in 2017, these two things happened. At the same time, also, the president of the Republic that year, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, he traveled to Senegal, to Gorée, the island. This is very important in the history of slavery. And rather than apologizing or even telling about the history or the responsibility that Portugal has in the slave trade, he emphasized that Portugal was the first country to abolish slavery in 1761, which is untrue. Portugal abolished then slavery.
And also not relevant.
Also not relevant. Portugal abolished then slavery in Portugal, but to redirect all of the people to Brazil, because that was where the enslaved people were necessary for the plantation economy.
But now he's saying
something quite
that
different.
He suggests to apologize, and not only to apologize, but also to not turn your back on, and the job is done. Not only apologize.
Yeah,
it's also about responsibility for the future of what we did in the past, and then really important, the good and the bad.
Yes, so that is interesting. And it also needs to be contextualized. This was on the 25th of April. That is the annual commemoration of the Carnation Revolution that ended the Portuguese dictatorship of the 20th century and also led to decolonization of the Portuguese then African colonies. And the president of Brazil was at this ceremony as well, Lula da Silva, on his first visit to Europe since he's been elected again. And he had just addressed Parliament, and this was the speech from the president of Portugal that followed. And he said that decolonization was an important part of the Carnation Revolution of 1974. And therefore we also need to look at what happened in the past and take full responsibility, indeed, for the good and the bad. And the bad, he referred to slavery. This is the first time that a Portuguese politician a president or prime minister has ever even mentioned slavery, and something that Portugal needs to address. But it's interesting that he then mentions also the good, which he refers to the Portuguese language in Brazil and the culture that Portugal brought to Brazil. So it's the sort of he's talking about the bad and slavery, but he's also emphasizing again that narrative that the Portuguese brought civilization and culture to other parts of the world.
And just to add in, I think the context is important too. Someone like Britain and France, who have this long, huge histories of much larger empires, slavery, descendants of the enslaved living in the country, like myself, millions of people. This makes that, like for Germany, it's different. Their link to slavery is very, very different. It's much more obscure. For Britain, it's very clear. And there are millions of us who live in the country who, if you say sorry, we can then go, I'm a descendant of the enslaved. I want my money, right? So I think for someone like Britain and France, it's almost impossible for them to do that because it opens up so many potential routes for legal claim.
Absolutely.
Yes, and nice example also of Germany, because Germany is not really represented at the table, but in the joint declaration between Namibia and Germany from, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago, was a statement was also very interesting for the ambivalent language, because I think Germany stated that the facts that happened in the beginning of the 20th century, so referring to the murder on the peoples, the Herero, etc., were of a nature that we could, in present terms, perhaps is somehow similar to what we would now call genocide. Such a statement. So they use the word.
So it's still the past is the past.
It is still the past and the past, but you could say it's genocide in the present terms if you. But it falls short of just saying it was genocide, whereas the Armenian genocide, countries are quite quick to recognize the genocide and to accusing Turkey of refusing to say it was genocide. But when it comes to your own genocide, it's much more difficult to recognize it. And then this ambivalence is still very much present in all those apologies that were also shown here. But that doesn't mean that they are valid. You must take care not to say it is useless. So this ambivalence is a starting point in the good direction. So being ambivalent about your own past is different from refusing to talk about it or just behave as if nothing happened. So it is a starting point, but it is not the last thing that needs to be done.
Yeah, so I'm interested, how do you personally look at those apologies? Do you also think
Which apologies?
do you think it's to be ambivalent? It's the starting point.
I mean, are we talking about Europe in general or about France?
Yeah, what would be a good apology?
I mean, really, it's very interesting. So I just created a Center for Black European Studies in the Atlantic because we're talking about this is a trans-European, transnational circulation that gave birth to Europe as we know it, and that created this ripple situation, in America, above the United States, and what's happening south of the border, and in the Caribbean.
In the whole world,
actually. So in the whole world, it's the birth of capitalism. Capitalism was born from blackness. It's the birth of the modern world. But to me, I'm looking at it, with a special eye in France because, one, I'm French. This is my history. But also, when you tie it to, this very special construction of Frenchness, right? This idea that we had starting in the 16th century of, saying, how do we define Frenchness? We don't want to define it, with economy or this. It will be defined through culture, and at the heart of culture, language. And with all these petals, I mean, just think about the flower, and we'll have all these petals, like food and the way we dress and architecture and art. And all of that will represent Frenchness, and this how much we fought to have this, be reinforced from one century to another, in the 16th century and the 17th, making these classic with Versailles and the 18th century, the Enlightenment. So this is all part of a very long history. And to me, when we were talking about the reinstatement of slavery last year for the bicentennial of Napoleon, for the first time, one of the most important historians of France, who's a Napoleonist, Jean Tullard, came on TV and he's like, oh my God, I'm 90. My entire life, people have seen Napoleon as a hero. And for the first time, I have some black perturbators coming here telling that Napoleon this and that, and Haiti. So he really didn't understand what the fuss was about. So a journalist asked him, was it true that slavery was reinstated? This is 2022 in France. And he said, yes, but it was for very pragmatic reason. And I'm studying this with my student. He used the vocabulary of end of life, resuscitation. It was a very heavily medical vocabulary of an organism that is dying, that needs new blood, that needs to be revived. And then we just had to, reinstate slavery. And he added this. Nobody complained. Abbé Grégoire, the Society of the Friends of the Negroes, complained, he pouted a little bit, but other than that, nobody complained. I remember I was peeling onion and I stopped dead in my track. So you mean to tell me somebody has been freed for 8 years and they learned that Leclerc is coming with boats to reinstate slavery and they won't complain? And to me, that nobody says everything about this state. They are nobody. These slaves are nobody. People who complain are nobody. Their descendants, like us, who are still the descendant of this history, are nobody. And that explains how history was built, how Frenchness is built, while taking this as a satellite that is completely out of sight while it built this country. So when
talking about how does colonialism and enlightenment or fraternity go hand in hand in France?
So they don't. It's not. I mean, the only way. I mean, just think about the way we learn about colonialism. We don't learn about it for a long time, and then when we learn it, it's the civilizing mission. We bought these things there. It's not seen as something that was that is part of us and absolutely not seen. When I say that France is born in blackness, people, I receive death threats because it's like, no, France was born of the Enlightenment and of our brain, right? And so it's seen as so divorced from France that we can't see it as being us. And when you ask what's the state of asking we are sorry, and like you say, sorry is the first step to sit around the table and say, how do we repair this? It starts by realizing that something needs repair. It starts by realizing that something is broken. And right now, when I just wrote a book that was called Universalism, and people are like, oh, she's attacking universalism. Universalism needs to be protected because it worked and it was created by our founding fathers. So it needs to be, put in a museum and protected from these aggressors who are importing these issues from England and the US. And I say, wait a minute. So when this was crafted in 1789, poor people couldn't vote. 1789, the revolution. So it was not a democracy because poor people couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote until 1944. It was not a democracy. Muslims in Algeria could not be, by virtue of the Code de l'Indigénat, they were considered second-grade citizen because they were Muslim. It was not a democracy. And it's because people who were on the fringe of this and people who had the full rights but thought that this was not normal, took it and made it a better project. That we have to not forget that it is an ongoing project and we will keep making it better. So yeah, it's hard actually to, and I'll stop with that, to have French people understand that this is not something that comes from outside to break democracy, to break universalism. It is one of the projects of universalism if we want this democracy to be full.
So you're not ready to, France is not ready to apologize yet?
They will ask you, apologize from what? Apologize from what?
Yeah, this is the bigger problem is if you think about universalism. So what the West is a universal project, but it's a universally racist project, and white supremacy is underpinned in the idea of universalism. So, for example, if you think about universal rights, the right to life, what does that mean? What that means is, this is all propped up by colonialism, right? Enlightenment is only a product of Western colonialism.
In what way?
Well,
simple.
Right, so I try to really, really simply. But in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Europe was behind everywhere. Anybody saying that Europeans were advanced would have been left off the face of the planet because Europe was behind. Yeah. There was then a couple of hundred years of slaughter the world has never seen, genocide in the Americas, slavery, colonialism, which kind of upends this, right? And because of this colonial expansion, Europe becomes the richest, Europe becomes the top. And in this process, actually destroys the legacies of knowledge from Africa, from Asia, et cetera, and even to the point of burning books written in Arabic, rewriting them in Latin and pretending that they were always European, right? So there's actually a very clear project between 1492 and, say, the Enlightenment, 17th century, 18th century, that creates a world where white people are at the top and white people like Rousseau, Locke, Kant could believe that they were superior, right? It's literally impossible without that 200 years of colonial violence. So that creates this idea that we are better, that the white people have the rationality that rule the world, create the laws that we're still using. And so universalism becomes this thing where, yes, we have universalism, but white supremacy is a part, a function, a feature of universalism. And so for example, when you have liberty, equality, fraternity, you have all men are created equal, but you have slavery, with people saying this, own Africans as slaves. It's because we're not actually fully human. Yeah. And that's embedded into Western universalism. And I'd say it's still today, right? We like to think it's all, but it's not. The world today, if you look at the map by global inequality, the poorest countries are the black countries, the richest countries are the white countries, and there is a hierarchy in between. And we've all kind of accepted that starving African children is just kind of what happens, right? And we just give a bit of money and feel better about it. So this idea of Western universalism having white at the top and black at the bottom is still where we are. It hasn't shifted. And so when you're then trying to have a conversation about apology, about rights, about law, and people are saying, well, it wasn't a crime in the 18th century, therefore it's not a crime now. What kind of a justification could that be? In fact, genocide as a term only comes into being in the Holocaust. So imagine this, before the Holocaust in Europe has killed, the numbers are staggering. Just in the Americas, it's probably about 65 million people wiped off the face of the earth because of Europeans. Then you take slavery, you take Congo, where 10 million, half the population was erased by the Belgians. None of these counted or led any European philosopher to think, we need a word for mass killings. Didn't, because we weren't human. We're literally not human beings.
It's a racial matrix. It's a racial matrix. So, we have this thing where I don't know, and I'm very curious to hear what's your situation, but in France, it's so weird. Slavery, when we think of slavery, our mental image is the plantation of Louisiana. It's not the house in Guadeloupe. It's American cotton. It's never sugar. So the word that we use, our mental image, is always America. And when you say white supremacy in France, people say, why do we say that? We're not the KKK. I mean, they think of, the black people hanging in the trees in Mississippi, and they don't realize that white supremacy is the code. I mean, in my book, I call it the racial matrix. The fact that you had, like when you code a computer, you have to start with a coding thing. And race was coded, especially blackness, to explain, to rationalize. I mean, you can't go in front of God. I mean, people will believe in God and say, hey, I'm coming from earth where I've been, subjecting some of your children into slavery. So those children had to be non-human. You have to rationalize it religiously. You have to rationalize it legally. I mean, if it's illegal to have slaves, you can't just keep people, stole them, and have them work. You can go to jail. You have to rationalize it philosophically. So in order for all these things to make sense, you have to decide, and this is what we did in France with Le Code Noir, the Black Code. Black people, slaves, are furnishers. They're not human. So that is really the key to white supremacy. And I don't know, I mean, I'm really interested to hear what's the situation in your country. In France, it's really a war of words, because for us, white supremacy in our mind is coded with KKK, American supremacy, and people were like, I'm not wearing a hood, why are you talking about it? And they don't realize that white supremacy is beyond the hood and the American slave system. It's just the circulation of whiteness in the Atlantic and the creation of Europe, capitalism, and the world.
Yeah, is there a difference between France and the UK?
Or
on this issue, no, I don't think. I think it's based. I mean, the difference language-wise. So the UK, we do have races because a category we collect census data on race, etc. But in terms of actually, it's the same. It's very much like you didn't learn about colonialism. I'm a professor. I've gone through every level of education. The only time I've heard empire in a classroom is when I've spoken it in a classroom. Wow. And considering that actually this is the main thing that makes Britain Britain, is its huge empire. You'd think it was impossible to not talk about empire, but we don't talk about it at all.
Even when people have tea at 5 p.m.
No, tea would be the most classic colonial culture. But yeah, we just don't talk. There's this complete absence of it, talking about it, erasure of it. That's utterly, because once you start to think about it, then you have to, it's a bit like apologizing. If you actually start to understand where everything comes from, then you have to take responsibility.
Sophia, you were also writing things down. What would you like to...
I was just mostly from what I was hearing. No, but I think what this idea of also... What Kehinde, what you were mentioning about the universalism, I think I would say the Portuguese narrative about the colonial past, which is ingrained in the idea of the age of discoveries, the discovery that the Portuguese went around the world, putting new places on the European map of the world and discovering new peoples and places, is very much this. And this narrative today is still very much used to claim that Portugal was the pioneer in globalization, as if globalization is even a good thing, but that's a whole different discussion. But and I think that the age of discoveries officially started in 1415, what I mentioned with the conquest of Ceuta in Morocco, nowadays Morocco. And in 1444, there was the first market in the south of Portugal with enslaved people, where more than 200 people were sold in Portugal into slavery. 1444. So the age of discovery, the so-called age of discoveries and slavery started around the same time. But the age of discoveries, the whole idea that this whole connection to the sea, this is such a strong, I would say it's probably the strongest element of Portuguese identity and culture still today.
Yeah, and also saw you in blogs you wrote talk about the myth of the good colonizer.
Yes, that's. I mean, I'm assuming that is also something that comes across in all different narratives of colonialism in Europe. But there was this idea of this Brazilian sociologist called Gilberto Freire, and he developed this idea of lusotropicalism, and this was this idea that the Portuguese were more benevolent and kind colonizers than other European powers. So they were also more predisposed to mix with other colors and cultures than other European empires. And this idea was very much appropriated in the 1950s by the regime of Salazar, the dictatorship, to justify the Portuguese presence in Africa. Like, no, we're not. This is not really colonialism. We're good. We're doing good things there, and therefore we need to maintain these colonies.
We're just mingling.
We're kind, and just mixing. And this was at a time after the Second World War where Portugal was being increasingly pressured by international powers to grant independence to the colonies.
In what way?
Because after the Second World War, there are a lot of countries that were they were gaining their independence, and Portugal was keeping hold of Angola, Mozambique, the Portuguese colonies in Africa, and Guinea-Bissau, São Tomé, and Cape Verde, and using this narrative of first the discoveries, we were here for a long time, so we have always been here. On the other hand, we are good colonizers, without really using the term colonizer.
And is this idea still present?
Definitely, yeah. You still, in schools, in music in Portugal, and names of restaurants, companies. That just the other day I was in Lisbon, and there's this big poster of a coffee brand called Negrita, which, well, I guess you understand what that means, and with the image of also similar image to what we saw from the French Parliament. So it's really still very much ingrained in Portuguese culture today. This idea of the positive side of colonialism, without actually calling it colonialism, or even talking about slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, universalism. I was thinking, when was the first time that I heard about the revolution in Haiti? Not at my school when I was young, not at high school, not even at the university, later. Mm. I was far in my 30s somewhere, maybe 15 years ago. And I was very happy to learn of it, because for me...
What did you learn?
I learned that in Haiti there was a constitution, there were several constitutions, but one constitution in which very clearly racial equality was explicitly formulated as an article, and freedom and the end of slavery were completely connected, were put in one formula. The end of slavery and liberty was one and the same. And that is the most modern constitution of the Enlightenment. There is not a better example of Enlightenment constitution than that constitution, and it was silenced in school. For us, the constitution was the Dutch constitutions, where all those ideals were pronounced, but not slavery. Slavery was silenced in the constitutions because pragmatic and economic reasons, and also a big fear, a racist fear in effect, of slaves being liberated and what they would do. So that was another, and Haiti was used as a bad example. Mm-hmm. So, but for me, it would extremely helpful and somehow repair and save Enlightenment if we should commemorate the Haitian constitutions and their formulas.
And I just found out when I researched this for this program that Haiti paid reparations to France.
Until very recently, by the way.
So can you tell me something about it?
So thank you so much for adding this, because Jacques Chirac, again him. I mean, and I really liked him when I was young. So our former president was interviewed, again, you can Google it, find it. And he said that Haiti was not a French colony, per se. And the journalist asked him, what do you mean? He said, yeah, it's a country that speaks French. We wonder how that happened. You can Google this. And that France, in its long tradition of humanist endeavors, is helping. So, again, graduating in history, it's at Brown University in the US that I learned. I've always heard of Haiti, and to me, growing up in France, when you say Haiti, you hear earthquake, gangs, coup. This is the mental image that you have of Haiti, right? And this word that goes with Haiti, cursed, the curse. And actually, I learned very late where the word curse came from when we attached this to Haiti, this cursed country. So it's in the US. I learned of Haiti. I didn't know that Haiti was Saint-Domingue. I never connected the two. I didn't learn it. And I graduated in history from one of the top programs. And you talked about the Netherlands, but I'm from a country that praised itself on being one of the most advanced modern republic. And when we learn about revolution, republicanism, democracy, we always have two revolutions that are in our minds. The French Revolution 1789, that, as you know it, our papers would not name the French papers of revolution Revolution, the French Declaration, it was the universal declaration. It was the gift of France to the world. And the second one being the American Revolution that gave birth, like both the French and the American gave birth to the two biggest republics in the modern world. But it's in the US, that I learned that because none of these two revolutions gave racial equality, and it's the Haitian Revolution with tout monde c'est monde, every human is human, that established that. And just to finish with that idea also of Republican universalism, how universalism was built on racial inequality, and we can use that word without being afraid of, KKK, with white supremacy. I'll just share my last photo. Really, I have 1 minute. Can I show my second photo? And I know that in the Netherlands, you might be... So this is a picture that is taken in Dunkirk. It's a manifestation called La Nuit des Noirs, the Night of the Blacks. It's going on. It's been going on for 53 years, and every year 10,000 people run in the city for 3 weeks, paint in black for 3 weeks. And so in 2018, with some other black citizens, we wrote to the mayor and say that, this is crazy, and the apex of the manifestation is that they have to catch one and dunk him in a bucket called civilization, and it comes out white, and they say civilisation, everybody hears civilisation. So it's 10,000 people. And the mayor of the city, who is from the left, actually, came to defend this manifestation along with the entire spectrum. And this is what's very interesting about
familiar.
France. Very interesting. From the left to the right, defending it by saying this. He said that this is the Republic because it's liberté. For 3 weeks, everybody's free to do what they want. It's fraternité because, people mingle and have fun. And it's égalité because under the suit, we don't know who's rich, who's poor, who's a man, who's a woman. He said, this is the Republic. And to me, it's really interesting to see what this means. I mean, when you read this with the fresco, the fact that race can be enacted and all the most racist representation of race, you have people working with this kind of monkey walk, the fact that the black person has to be dunked in a bucket called civilization, and when he comes out white, everybody yells civilization, and there's no racial undertones, because remember, race does not exist in France. It's the Republic.
I have to say, this is one thing living in the UK. We're a little bit... This doesn't happen in the UK. No, that's one thing I can...
What makes it that
what
doesn't
happens
happen?
in the UK?
No, okay, what happens and why do you think that this can't happen in the UK?
I don't know. It's interesting because... I think because so much of our discussion is more American and not American, probably more Caribbean. So there's a massive influence of Caribbean intellectual scholarship in the UK, which also in the US. All right, so thinking about the Black Marxists, thinking about Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, there's such that Caribbean, that link to the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean links us to the kind of American way of understanding things. So we
It's
collect
also
data.
because you have the language to talk about.
Yeah, so we have a language. We collect data on race. I can give you all of the terrible statistics. Black people are 7 times more likely to be taken into custody because of mental health issues. 3 times more likely to be in prison. I can literally list off all the statistics. So the kind of discourse in Britain is slightly different. So we have had blackface. Blackface was a thing in the UK up until probably when I was growing up, but it's now almost universally accepted that it's a bad thing. So you wouldn't. I mean, that wouldn't happen in the UK. Does that make it better in the UK? I strongly doubt it's any better in terms of outcomes. But there is a different language. So some of these things, I think Britain has been probably better at the dealing with the open, obvious racist stuff like that. But actually, on the actual lived experience ground level, the only real difference is I can tell you the statistics, whereas you don't have the statistics in most of Europe. Right?
Do you think that's also something we should do in the Netherlands? Statistics of
I'm not
people
an expert on this, but so everybody can answer or not answer this. But we have had this very big Black Pete debate. So this reminds me, of course, of this debate. And the outcome of that debate has been that this whole tradition of Black Pete has been changing a lot. Perhaps not in all parts of the Netherlands, but there has been a very big transformation because of this debate. And it was a very polarized debate. It was a nasty debate. There was some violence, especially the activists, the black activists, have been attacked, etc. So that it has been ugly, but it was an extremely important moment because there has been this shift. So that's true. So this tradition has so what you are saying is this tradition is still there and nothing has changed. You cannot say the same about the Black Pig tradition in the Netherlands. That has really been changed. It's not completely disappeared.
Going in the right direction. Let's talk about reparations because, what's the next step after apologies, and what should reparations look like?
I can't talk.
We are not there yet. Would you like to say something about that?
I mean, I want to try and be positive, because I think there is once the case for reparations is impenetrable. Actually, if you actually think about it, when we talk about reparations, it's not just that there was a terrible thing done in the past. Actually, that terrible thing that was done in the past is still with us today. Like, you cannot explain. Like, let's just take the Caribbean, where actually France, Holland, UK have roots there, right? Somewhere like Jamaica, deeply poor country, people only there because of slavery. There's no other reason. There's no other reason my family live in Jamaica than slavery. There's no way to explain that poverty without legacies of slavery. And the wealth that Britain generated through our capture there, and the poverty that's still there. So this isn't something that's gone. It's something that's very clearly here. And you can actually kind of calculate how much money we're talking about. So the estimate for the Caribbean is anywhere between $8 and $14 trillion that needs to be repatriated back to those countries so they can close that wealth gap. And there's no real argument against it, other than it would cost a lot of money, right? And so
to make a calculation is a right way to make a calculation for you is to look at the wealth gap and fix it.
That's the pretty much. I mean, how much money? If we're talking about it's just universalism, if we're talking about universalism and how do we create an equal world, look at the gap and fill it, because that gap was created by Western imperialism. There's no doubt about it. So as I'm making all these arguments, though, I can also tell you that it will never happen. Like never. That's never, ever, ever, ever in a million years going to happen. And so what I worry is what will happen, is what is already starting to happen, is you'll have these kind of apologies, you'll have some token form of reparation. So Lloyd's of London is a perfect example of this. Lloyd's of London is Britain's biggest corporate entity. Its turnover is about $50 billion a year. Lloyd's of London celebrated its 300th anniversary. The CEO came on TV and said, "We are happy to celebrate our roots in ensuring the merchant trade." She neglected to mention they were ensuring the slave trade. This is how this company started. It is now the richest company in Britain. Not a coincidence, I would suggest. Now, this is a company that's been sued multiple times in the US courts because they have all the records. They've always rejected, nothing to do with us, we can't apologize, no reparations. After George Floyd, and when everybody's saying, look, black squares and all that nonsense, they came out and said, look, we apologize, we're sorry. We'll have a diversity scheme, and we'll give some money to charity. And that was their reparations statement, that's it. So they now feel better about themselves, they've apologized, they put some money aside, but it's still exactly the same. And my worry is you just have that replicated on a country level, on a big institution scale. So we'll have apologies and reparations, but everything will stay exactly the same.
Sophia, are you also afraid that's going to happen here in the Netherlands? With the formal apologies of Mark Rutte?
Well, I mean, it is already involving schemes for subsidies of different forms that will be used in the Netherlands and the Six Islands, and eventually also for other countries like Suriname, South Africa, etc. I think when I think of reparations, I think before you can even think about repairing, you also need to just establish some kind of dialogue on an equal footing, which does not exist. It still doesn't exist. I mean, if we see how the apologies in the Netherlands took place, there was a lot of criticism. It should have not been done on the 19th of December. It should have been the king, not the prime minister, etc. So you see that the dialogue also there did not take place as should have taken place. And I think, so in first instance, creating this equal dialogue on an equal footing and then seeing what is actually necessary, because I think the needs are very different from country to country. And I think there's also a necessity to look at what was actually the impact of colonialism. I think in the Caribbean, it's maybe different from in different African countries or in Brazil. And I think this still needs to be openly discussed, researched, I think, because I think there is already data. If you look at the climate crisis, it is also linked to colonialism very strongly. But this also needs, and it has been also denounced, but I think this needs to be looked into more carefully.
Yes, so lots of things are happening. So we have this whole debate, I think global debate, especially also European debate about restitution of objects, cultural objects from colonial collections, currently in European museums, also United States. And then the debate about colonial slavery reparations. There I agree a lot with what has already been said. What you see is that I think the institution of colonial slavery was legal and economical. So if you want to redress that, you should do something in these two domains. You should do something legally meaningful, and you do something economically meaningful. And what you see, what's in fact happening, is that they are not giving a legal recognition, but only a moral recognition, and they are not offering economic reparations, but only cultural reparations, monuments, museums, anti-racism programs, etc. So that is all valuable, but you must address a wrong in the language of the wrong. So you have to correct the wrong by correcting the law. If the law has been unjust, you have to repair the law. If the economy has caused an enormous inequality.
What can be a way to correct the law?
Now you have the CARICOM 10-point plan, for example. So that is already.
Yeah, we also have a slide of that.
Yes, that is this one. Yes, so this is already a plan from I think 2014, 10 years old, almost. And this was I think a very fair proposal. In fact,
so where did this proposal came from?
From the Caribbean nations, I think 14 somehow. So most Caribbean nations are behind this claim, and what they say, we do not ask for individual reparations, but we ask for meaningful reparations, socially, culturally, but also economically. And what they are asking is, for example, the last one, debt cancellation. So there you are not arguing that all the profit has been returned with interest. No, it is much more modest. They are saying, well, there is now an actual inequality based on debt. Cancel those debts as a meaningful way to repair things in the present. That can be easily done. But when you do that, it is the same as saying it has been a crime against humanity in the time. You make yourself vulnerable. That is a vulnerable, courageous step to take by Western governments. But that would be the only meaningful step to do something in terms of reparations that actually makes sense. You cannot stop short only with cultural reparations.
Yeah, but I think like CARICOM's better than some other plans, but it's still. I always go to Malcolm X's quote where he says, "If you stick a knife 9 inches in my back and pull it out 3 inches, you haven't really repaired anything."
Yes.
Even if you pull it all the way out, I've still got a gaping wound in my back, right?
It is a better starting point than other.
Well, yeah, this is but this is pulling it out 3 inches. So, for example, the debt. Why is the Caribbean in debt in the first place?
Yes,
because they were left without being able to support themselves because of the legacies of slavery. So debt cancellation should happen, but it shouldn't be in a conversation of reparations. Reparations is how do you solve the bigger economic position in the first place. The debt is like a new problem of neocolonialism, which never should have occurred. And this is what I worry happens in reparations, is that we accept things that aren't actually reparations. And I think I actually think this probably happens. Some version of this will probably happen.
Is there another point that you find interesting?
I mean, so I think...
Point two, repatriation.
I mean, repatriation is... repatriation is interesting because repatriation has a long racist history and also a revolutionary history. So if you think about America in particular, when Lincoln was all keen to free the enslaved, his first plan was free the enslaved and send us away. We don't want you in the country.
Yeah.
And so the idea of sending black people back somewhere, back to Africa, has a racist past, but also in the Caribbean, people like Marcus Garvey, he was a Jamaican hero, says, look, actually, we do need to repatriate back to Africa, which is true. But again, thinking about why is it that Caribbean people, which is heavily poor, people need work, they go to England, they go to Canada, why don't they go to Ghana? Why don't they go to Nigeria? Because the African continent is in the same situation as the Caribbean, where it's been heavily decimated by white racism, but the economy is in a poor condition. So if you are going to talk about reparation, then you can't repatriate people from the Caribbean until you repair the damage done on the African continent so the economies can function.
Yeah,
That's not going to happen in this plan, though, is it?
About the African continent, the current situation now in Senegal, where can you tell me a little bit about it? We also have a photo of the O'Shea, and this is Ousmane Sonko, the leader of the opposition. There's a lot of different facts around him, but the thing is that there was a lawsuit against him, and he's saying it's only to get him out of the way of the current president, and the current president is saying that it's a normal lawsuit, but now. He has to go in prison for 2 years, and there are a lot of riots going on at the streets now. I think this week, maybe it's already more, but 9 youngsters died because of these riots. And I think this is also interesting to show you that people are attacking the ocean, so everything comes together again. What are your thoughts about it?
So the situation in Senegal is sad. It's because Senegal has long been called one of the most stable democracy in Africa, but Senegal is the backyard of France. It's really, I think it's one of the things that also explain its very long democracy and a long stability, right? Mm-hmm. If you compare it to all, there was a point where I think every single one of Senegal's neighbor, Mali, the Gambia, both Guineas, Mauritania, were in political turmoil. But the link between what's happening, the very sad situation, I think we had something like 25 deaths in the past 2 days, with our conversation, is this generational shift and a young generation in Senegal who are actually saying, hey, if you're telling us that independence occurred on April 4th, 1960, it means that we're independent. How is it that most banks still belong to France? What's happening with this very visible sign of the French presence, like the French army? The French army is supposed to have left Senegal 12 years ago, but they're still very visible. And the symbols, like Senegal is building a new tram, they are building, and all these things belong to France.
Language.
The language. So the language, we're talking a revolutionary language is being used because the president is really seen, and people were really excited about him being the first president that the country had that was born after independence, and this was really seen as a sign. And you know,
you mean Macky Sall?
The president, yeah. And the idea is that he's still, kind of a puppet. So I think it's really
a puppet of France.
Yeah, and I mean the language and the thing that really got me scared is that you see this generational shift with young people in the streets saying we are ready to take on, to be gunned down, but this needs to change, and we will be the generation that will give, this independence process that started apparently 60 years ago, and that has never been really fully established, because we live in neocolonialism. Will stop with us, even if it means that we will be dead and not here to see it. So the word France is coming a lot, with things like ingérence, etc. And I just hope that, things will get better.
Yeah. So, and how does the culture of France influences the ties to their former colonies right now?
I'm sorry, I missed
The culture and identity of France. How does it influences the ties France has right now with their former colonies?
True language. When you think of French colonization, we often say that French colonization happened thanks to les 4M. The merchant, when you think of the place that trade occupied both during slavery and during colonization, the missionary. Le missionnaire was a very important part, a very important figure of both slavery and colonization through bringing civilization, through Christianity, teaching language, being the schoolmaster. The third one being le maître, the schoolmaster, bringing civilization through language. When you look at the early texts of African, Francophone African literature, Camara Lai, one of the most important figures is the figure of the maître, who's usually, a frail young man from southern France who finds himself in Africa, but he's going on the adventure of his life. And it was one of also the very important figure of colonial propaganda, this idea of, get out of Le Gers and Le Rhône and go be part of this mission of us bringing universalism and civilization in the world. Go teach in Vietnam, in etc. So, le marchand, le maître, le missionnaire, and the third one, or the fourth one, who actually, when you compare to the situation with Germany or UK, did not have that much work, which is le militaire. We had some resistance in Senegal with people like Ladjor, Béhanzin, but French colonialism really relied more on the first three. So the cultural part, language, trade, and religion more than, fighting. So the link is very strong, and you think of figures like Senghor, the importance of French, the importance. So culturally, the links are very, very strong, especially through French language. La francophonie, which again, it's very interesting. I was looking at, I'm an artist, so I look at also, I don't only listen, I also look at the visual of revolution. The kids are talking about doing having a revolution. They're destroying French interest au champ, but also the office of La Francophonie was attacked, and the Francophonie is seen as this kind of underbelly of this remnant of colonialism. We want to develop our own cultures. And the development of our own cultures will have to go through us being able to speak our own language, because we're in Senegal, a country where it's the official number is 39% of the population is literate, and literate means anything. It can mean, I can answer a sentence in French by saying yes, or I can go to university. But French is still the language of trade and the official language. So it's all these questions that are also being raised by these children when they talk about, getting our country back. And a lot of the looks are also being sent to Rwanda, who's given the example in Africa. I don't know if you heard, but Rwanda just decided to switch to English, go from French to English. So it's all these circulation that are also happening with this very tense situation in Senegal.
Do you think there's a difference between the former colonies of the UK?
You guys have the Commonwealth.
Commonwealth.
I'm just looking at the wigs in Nigeria.
France probably has a more direct control over currency things like this than the former British colonies. But then we do still have the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is still there, and there's still. The key thing is economic. So even if countries are independent, they're not really independent because they still heavily rely on their links to Britain. So, for example, why is the Commonwealth? Commonwealth is actually growing, so it's adding countries that weren't in the British Empire. And the reason they're joining is so they can get close to countries that were formerly in the British Empire because they think they have better links to Britain. Yeah. It's all about economic. Even though there's no actual benefits to being in the Commonwealth, the big benefit is you feel like you have links to the superpower, because actually since independence, the economic situation has stayed pretty much exactly the same. And I'm going to give a quick Jamaican example, which has had independence since '62 in theory. But there was Jamaica was making a lot of noise about reparations and apologies for slavery. And in 2015, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, went into Jamaican Parliament and basically said, "Get over it." So literally said, "Get over it. We're not going to. It's not going to happen." Everybody went mad. Oh no! And he said worse than he said all of that. And then he said, "Well, look, we'll build you a prison. And the reason we'll build you a prison isn't even for Jamaicans, it's because Jamaican prisons are really terrible, and because of the Human Rights Act, it's difficult for Britain to deport Jamaican criminals to Jamaica. So he was basically offering as reparations to build a prison so that Britain could deport criminals into Jamaica. Right there, everybody got really mad at this at the time. But guess what they just finished building this year? The prison. The prison got built. But worse, they didn't. But because
so they start with the reparations.
Yeah, but the story's even worse because Jamaica was so, we can't let Britain build the prison. They actually got a loan from the IMF to build this prison for Britain. So Britain didn't even pay for the prison. Jamaica's got now more debt to pay for the prison for Britain to deport Jamaican nationals into. And this is not an independent country, and this is a simple fact. Actually, most of these colonies are still not actually independent. They're still heavily dependent on their former empires, right?
And Barbados left the colony.
I mean, Barbados left Barbados is still in the Commonwealth, but Barbados doesn't have the king as head of state.
Oh, that's it. Yes.
So even that, imagine Jamaica has been independent for 50 years and still has King Charles is the head of state. It's nonsense. It's not. I don't know what to say. It's nonsense. Right?
Yeah, let's have a look at the audience if there are any questions. Okay, coming right at you.
Thank you all for illuminating all these, also awful histories of each of your specific countries. I think each of the countries has a history of also avoiding responsibility in the discussion. I was wondering, this is a moment where we're some European member states, or not anymore, but together to talk about these issues. I'm a little bit skeptical also about the role of the European Union, of course, in telling the history. It's all sort of a born out of innocence and never war again, but they members kept on waging war. What do you, if anything, what do you see as a role of a common European conversation about this, whether it's politically or culturally? Do you see it each being an individual member state's responsibility, or do you think it's a wider concern?
I don't feel like a comment.
Sophia?
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about. Yeah, I would. Oh, right, I need to speak into the mic, I think. I definitely think that is necessary. I have seen the Council of Europe, for instance, in 2021, told Portugal that Portugal needs to handle its colonial and slavery past better in order to address racism and discrimination today. And at the beginning of this year, there has been an observatory for racism and discrimination created in Portugal. There's been some critique around it because the people apparently that have been designated to lead it are white. But that's how it goes in Portugal still nowadays, people in important positions. But I definitely think that there is an important role because these histories of colonialism were not, they didn't end in at the borders, the national borders that we have today. I mean, you had Portuguese merchants sailing under other flags and French merchants sailing on the Portuguese flags in the transatlantic slave trade. Or you have, looking at restitution as well in colonial collections, you have Nigerian Benin bronzes in the Netherlands and all around the world, actually, the western part of the world. And so I think when we're also looking into restitution, now every country or several countries are now trying to address the return of these objects and creating databases to put all of these objects into one place, but based on national collections. But if you're in, I don't know, in Senegal or another country and you're looking for where are the collections from our country, you're not going to think, oh, I'm going to look at the Dutch database, the French database, the German database. You want to find maybe a European database or just a database for all the collections of one particular country or culture or community even. So I think that there definitely should be a significant role for...
Mom, are there other ways Europe should join forces?
His question is super interesting, and I think it's one of those questions that also gives you... The debate can appear very depressing, but we have to stay, I don't want to say a bit, but we have to stay hopeful. We're just talking about this not just for us, but for our children. I mean, I can't wait and say, hey, this conversation has been going on for 352 years. This might not happen in my lifetime. But if I'm realizing more and more that if I can have this, this idea for myself and this resolve to say, okay, I'm just going to have to accept it and live a stress-free life because this might not happen, but I'll try to do as much as I can. I realize that the only place why I can't accept this is when I look at my children, because I don't want this to be their world. So this forces us to remain upbeat and be hopeful. And for your question, absolutely, you know, when people at the Ministry of Culture look at me and say, hey, you should be grateful your history is at the parliament. It's not my history, it's ours. So how do we get people to understand that this is not, you know, when people say, okay, tell me here what you want me to repair, then first of all, it's not up to me, it's our problem. And also, even if I tell you that this is what I want, you'll be like, oh, this is too much, this is what I'm giving you. So the only way we can understand that this is for all of us to have at the national level, how did this created France, how did it impact, it created the Netherlands, Portugal. We need to have this at the local level, national level, continental level. Slavery was a trans-European project. It was a transnational, transatlantic, trans-world. We are talking about a crime against humanity. So this is something that concerns us as humans. So, and unless we don't understand that, it will always be, for us in France, that what we did, we talk about this slavery is the crime of the Americans, it's the crime of the Brazilians, the Portuguese, the crime of the apartheid, it's not ours. And unless we don't understand that it's also our history, it will be very hard. But yeah, we have to keep that, you know. We have the history of La Table Ronde, so it's part of what we do, you know.
What do you think, Wouter? What can the EU do?
Yes, very good question, and I agree a bit also with what Sophia says. So the problem is in fact also a European problem, especially so with in relation, for example, these objects, these cultural objects, and also the fact that the colonial space was a space in which these colonial nations, colonizer nations, European, were fighting each other. That was their free zone in which they, without the civilized laws of Europe were not applicable in that space. There they could fight each other, and that was the colonial space. So it would be a bit strange that each and every country separately would find solutions that are in fact very much common problems. However, it can be a danger if we are going to wait for a solution from the European Union, because I already hear my own government saying, well, we will wait. The question is now considered by EU, and we come back to you later when we hear back from them. I think that is not a good idea. So they should act on their own responsibility, and we should use the momentum that we have right now, but we should also push for European answers, because it is in fact a common European problem that should be addressed. Common Western European, yes, exactly.
I'll just add quickly, I think this is one of the things where Britain not being in the EU is a negative, because I was saying there's a different language in the UK, it's different, and I've been invited previously to consult on. We had the Being Black in Europe. There was the IPAD, International People Black in African Descent. There was a declaration written in the European Parliament, and having that different perspective of black academics and black activists in Britain was really helpful, I think, to the European discussion. And now that's gone, right? Because we're not there anymore. So I do think that's something that we'll be missing in the European discussion.
I have another question here. It's not a question.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is the question of reparations and compensation has a fundamental level, and that is that white people, in general, do not realize that they have lost their morality, their integrity, their righteousness with slavery and racism. And only when they get this back, we can work together for a solution. And they must realize that they can earn this back only by dealing with our eisen. Hoe zeg je dat? Our demands, with our demands, that they have to start with reparations, with compensation, zeg je eerlijke?
Honest.
With honest economic organizations, honest economic treaties and all these things. It is a mentality thing, I think. at the basic level. So,
Thank you.
I just wanted to very quickly add on that. So I just last year wrote an article entitled "Innocence, Ignorance, Arrogance: The Three Grays of French Anti-Blackness," and to say that, you know, like. Oftentimes the vocabulary is in France is I'm not the US, I'm not the KKK, and look, you speak French, so it's and also my parents didn't own slaves, and it was a long time ago. It's not my responsibility. My grandparents were poor farmers. I don't know and why you mean to me. And it's really, I think it's very important for us. Really, the first step for reparation is knowledge, knowing that this is not something that I'm putting on you to make you feel bad, but it's literally our history, right? I often say that in France, the first step toward reparation is to learn about Haiti, to learn about what we did to Haiti. I don't know if you know it, but we literally paid the Eiffel Tower with the ransom money. So a pool of American lawyers are trying to see if Haiti has a legal case to get the Eiffel Tower back, right? But so if we don't know, I think knowing will make a foundation where people will feel less like you attacking me. It's not my response. We all have a responsibility in knowing, and then once we know, maybe it opens, you know, the doors to be able. Because for us, I mean, I don't know if you realize, we talk about restitutions. We have people like, you know, Benedict Savoy, Philwin Starr. We have this but it's a conversation. It's a very elite minority having this conversation. You talk about it in the streets, people are like, don't take our stuff. It's not ours. And if you take it back, they don't have museums. These things were not supposed to be in museums in the first place. They were in houses. So I think to us, really, the first step is knowledge and knowing that this is not their history. It's been ours for 362 years as far as France is concerned, and it's a lot of time. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for the panel discussion. I had a question actually also about morality. When I look at the images, I see like white leaders of Europe coming together and say like, we're gonna say sorry. Yes, we're gonna say sorry. Okay. But I always learned saying sorry means something for two parties. And sometimes I miss the party that actually needs to receive the sorry. And also sometimes in this discussion, I miss those parties. Can you elaborate on, are the sorries actually accepted, or are the sorries actually taken into consideration at all? Or are they like, at this point, when you say sorry like this, I don't even want it?
Someone who wants to answer that question?
I can't.
Wouter?
Well, I can't myself, but speaking with people from Suriname and Curaçao, for example, limiting myself to the Dutch case, you see that they are very critically receiving the apologies and were very upset that apologies by the Prime Minister Rutte on 19 December were done without proper consultation, a bit out of the blue. So they were underway, but suddenly they needed to be done. So there was much confusion and anger and also distress about the fact that they were done in such a awkward way and in a way in which the Dutch government didn't show enough attention for the process that needs to be followed. So you always should include the people who are in fact demanding apologies or demanding reparations, to include them in the debates about what should be done, how should it be done, in order to generate a situation in which you can in fact have a valuable dialogue about what needs to be done. So in itself the speech was quite good, but he was much better received in the Netherlands than in Suriname and the Caribbean part of the Netherlands. That is very interesting. And they even, after the speech, they sent very critical letters still to the Dutch government that they were not satisfied. So your point is very important. One of the criteria according to which you can a bit try to evaluate whether apologies are meaningful is in fact the process and the question. So are the people for who those apologies are somehow meant included in the whole the whole process preceding the apologies made? So
yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that those apologies are PR. They're apologies for the politicians, not for the people. I say personally, I don't care. But apology is meaningless. I mean, it's meaningful in the sense if it gets you to a next stage, but just somebody coming and saying, I'm sorry,
and
not bringing any solutions.
Yeah.
Like King Charles, if King Charles apologized, would I be happy?
Yeah.
So, I'd be more offended than happy if King Charles apologized. It'd be ridiculous. It'd be a ludicrous thing for a king to apologize and then parade around in a gold cart that was taken from Ghana, the gold stolen out of Ghana. I mean, no. I mean, the notion of apology in itself, I think, is deeply problematic. What we want to see is actual substantive change. And that isn't a politician on TV.
So as I wasn't going to say anything, but you say something very important, this notion of steps, right? I remember this very important like art critic, Catherine Millet, said about the fresco that, hey, we never learned that these codes were racist. And also, you know, why is this person so mad making this and putting it in such an important place like the French Parliament is a way of, you know, saying sorry. And that was actually interesting because saying sorry about what? So case closed. And it's also very interesting that, you know, when you say that us saying sorry, it's also a dialogue. I mean, I say sorry, is it okay? And you can't dictate the term of the reparation and say that saying sorry is the end. And this is what we're saying, case closed. No, it's not case closed. Is the other party happy about it? And also, this cannot be a case closed. This has to be a stepping stone to
be a bit just towards the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. In his apology on 19 December, he clearly stated, I think several times, this is only the beginning of a very long process. I think that was quite good. That was appreciated.
Thank you so much for all my guests and also for you in the audience. During the talk, I was thinking maybe I've made another title, a different title for this event, because it was called How Europe Say Sorry. But I think a better title for the event is 1,000 Things Europe Should Apologize For. So thank you for watching.
You'll put it online?
Yes.
Okay, cool. But thank you so much for attending.